Everyone, thank you so much for coming to Zibby's Bookshop. Really excited to have you here today. We are here to celebrate the launch of Breaking the Circuit by Dr. Samantha Harte. Congratulations on the new release. Been getting great reviews, and she'll be in conversation tonight with Jolie Fisher. So it'll be about a 30-minute conversation. We'll open it up to a Q&A, and then plenty of books to buy and sell and enjoy. Yeah, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love a bookstore. I love books. I love telling stories. I mean, I think that I always have been. There's a method to what I'm going to do really quickly, tell you a little bit about myself and why I wrote my book. My name's Jolie Fisher. I'm the daughter of Connie Stevens and Eddie Fisher. And so that makes me Hollywood royalty, or sometimes a criminal. I don't know. It had a lot to live up to and a lot to live down in my life. And I recognize immediately the storyteller in you. We met on a rooftop at an Oscar gifting suite of all things. And I looked over into your eyes and I thought, I know you. And I feel like you felt the same way about me. My book came from the year of living dangerously a little bit. It was 2016. It started with a bang. My mother, Connie, had a stroke on Golden Globe night because, you know, that's how Hollywood we are. The same night, David Bowie passed away. And then I white knuckled the freeways, the 101 back and forth to Cedars, to where I live out in Calabasas. And she's okay. She's fading slowly, but she did not succumb to that stroke. And then the rest of the year, I promised my daughters, I have 5 children, 3 of them are female. I promised them that a woman would be the next president. And then you know what happened. And then in December of 2016, I was doing a play in Laguna Beach, a musical. I was playing Maleficent and shaking my moneymaker. And I was texting with my sister. She was in London and I was in LA, and we said a lot of things that were private and a lot of things that sisters say to each other. And then she said, I'll see you at Christmas. And that was the 23rd of December. And she was tragically and very dramatically died, my sister, Carrie Fisher. And so the world lost Princess Leia, and I lost my best friend, my mentor, my mirror. And I scratched out an article for the Hollywood Reporter in response to the outpouring of love that we received. And I said, you can't write this, R-I-G-H-T, but you sure can write it, W-R-I-T-E. And boy, do I have a book in me. And following, I got a little book deal, and I was scared about, you know, what does it mean to write your memoir? Somebody said to me, you have to write like everybody's dead. But everybody wasn't, you know, and you have to tell the truth, and you have to bleed on the page, and you have to, another person said, they're not stories that you need to make up. You know, it's the stories you've been telling your whole life, and that it's your experience. And I think that you have done that. I really I don't know you very long, but we became fast friends, and I feel like I know you intimately. And I think that you have been successful in just giving us everything of who you are. I met this spicy, sober margarita on that rooftop, and the death of my sister ignited the writer in me. I had, written a few things. And I feel like that was the gift that she gave me. Like, she left me with permission. And she came to me later, whether you believe it or not, and she was riding my like Peloton bike and smoking a cigarette in my dreams. But she was there for me. And she said, write the book, Jolie, write the book. So I did. And I think that you have a similar experience. So I want you to let us all know why now? Why this book? Why now?
Thank you, Jolie, for being here, for being who you are. And boy, we have a lot in common. I think a lot of us have a book inside of us, and everybody has a story to tell. And I was one of those people for decades that said, I'm going to write a book someday. And a lot of us say that, but what is it going to take for us to actually do that thing where we're making those tiny commitments every day so that eventually it becomes a book? And for me, much like you, on March 13th of 2022, I lost my sister to a drug overdose. I was in the Austin airport with my husband. We had a weekend away from our kids for the first time in years. We were thinking of buying another property. It was one of those moments where the world was our oyster. And as I was waiting in the airport to board the plane, I got that call, a call that I had been dreading for decades because I'm 15 years sober from drugs and alcohol. And I am the cycle breaker. I'm the one in a really long lineage of ancestral dysfunction, mental illness, addiction,
Generational trauma.
who is changing the trajectory, not just of my life, but of my kids' lives and their kids, should they have them. God, is that you? And like these big life moments will do to people, I was not the same in that moment, and I haven't been the same ever again. And I don't really remember the plane ride back to LA. I was sobbing, and my husband thought I should just maybe head straight to the East Coast where I'm from. And I said, get me on the plane. I need to see my kids. And apparently on the plane, I said to him, I'm writing a book. I didn't know at the time what it was going to become. I knew I had to write the stories of my life, that this thing that had just happened was arguably the biggest, most traumatic story of my life. But there were a lot of other ones too. And that's how it began. It's not just a memoir, though. It's a self-help memoir. So it turned into something else.
Well, you do get into, you're a truth teller like me and a healer, literally and spiritually. And you do get into the dirty, dark underbelly of addiction. And you do talk about self-loathing and having that. We're blessed with our DNA makeup. We're predisposed to addiction and mental health challenges. And Carrie wore her mental health challenge. She would say she would use a little bit coarser words about it, like a crown and a scepter. And then self-medication and addiction actually was what took her out. So you talk about, I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to use, I don't know what step it is, but we do talk about, about the 12 steps. And my book could have been called Sex, Drugs, and Musical Theater, but that's another story. You do this in the book so beautifully. You talk about healing yourself first before you can take care of anybody else. And you can't have control over other people's addictions and their problems. So talk about that a little bit. I don't know what step it is. You just remind me.
Well, that's actually a couple of the steps. My story is one of those stories, like a lot of people who have addiction trouble. I was very high functioning. So by the time I had an actual drug problem, I thought that was just a little thing on the side that I could fix and clean up and manipulate, and I could go on living the way I had been living, getting all of the fancy, shiny things, keep the boyfriend, get the grades, have the job. So I had overdosed on cocaine, but that wasn't my bottom. And I had gone into the recovery rooms and heard the steps and heard God, and it sounded so religious and so patriarchal and so outdated. And I just thought, no, this is not for me. I'm good, except for this little thing over here. So I just kept on going, trying a new cocktail of substances to anesthetize my inner critic. It didn't work. My boyfriend at the time caught the prescription bottle of pills that I was hiding. The look of shame in his eyes basically matched the shame that I felt inside, especially from having that overdose a year earlier. So I went to a meeting again, and I othered myself to death in the meeting. And I said, I'm not like you, and I'm not like you, and I'm not like you, and I don't really need this thing, and I hate the steps, and I hate the word God. But there was this one man named Bob. I have two Bobs here who I love so much. The name Robert, by the way, that's my husband's name. Bob, Bobby. I don't know what that is. I'm talking about weird divine interventions. Something about that name has such serious significance. And there was this guy named Bobby who was a friend before he became my sponsor. He was 22 years sober from heroin. We had been friends. He was a client of mine when I was personal training. And so when I was in this pit of despair, overdosing, anesthetizing, I called Bobby. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to get sober, but I know you're sober and you seem really happy. So he's like, well, just come with me. You don't have to believe any of the steps. You don't have to like it. Just come along. And it was good enough. I was so desperate. And then at the end of my first year, Bobby started acting weird. Couldn't put my finger on it. Went to California. Was going to see about the lights and the possibility of being in a place where I could maybe be a physical therapist and pursue entertainment, which was the stuff my dreams were made of, singing and dancing like a fool. And I wanted to tell Bobby about it. I wanted to tell him, and he didn't pick up his phone. And finally, 4 weeks later, his wife picked up and said he relapsed. That's why you haven't heard from him. Maybe you can see him when you get back. So I saw him, and it was as if somebody crawled behind his eyes and blew the light out. It was being in the presence of a ghost, which a lot of people can relate to, even if it's not about addiction. It's when you're around somebody who's physically alive, but whose spirit, whose essence, the thing that makes them who they are, is dead. And then 2 weeks later, he killed himself. And the reason I say that is not just because it's part of my story, but also because from that moment on, for the next 4 years, I knew two things. If I relapsed, I was going to die. And I hated those steps. So it was me and my will for 4 more years. And when you're a perfectionist and a hardcore type A, and you're a professional self-lacerator, that is misery. And when my marriage started to fall apart, and I swore I could just change his mind about what he thought of me, and I did all the things I had always done with the rest of my life, trying to control the outcome, but it failed. And I was at a breaking point. I was at the place that I believe is required, which is a soul level desperation where we can make real change. I had exhausted all the patterns of my whole life of people pleasing, self-abandoning, trying to quiet down the noise in between my ears, trying to control the outside world. I had tried everything and failed, and I was afraid to die. I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to live. So the right woman came into my life at the right time. I'm
going to write that down. Hold on. That was good.
It was good. Yeah.
We were talking the other day and we were gabbing about something, and I was leaning and I was looking at my bookshelves in my room, and mine are color blocked, by the way. They're not in that's how I did it this time around. And I'm looking at the beige section, and I see this book had been pulled out, and I was like, I didn't pull that book out. And I went to go grab the book. And you remember, it was
yes,
like,
I do.
I can't remember the title exactly, but it was like A Woman's Journey to Healing for Daughters Who Were Unmothered, and or like their unsolved mysteries with their mother. So as you said, there's a lot of patriarchal stuff, but what about mom? Do a little bit about mother.
Yeah. I mean, in my house growing up, mother's word was God. And what she told me was there's no such thing as God. And if you believe in God, you're a fool. And the only person you can count on is yourself. And she popped prescription pills like they were candy. And so not only was she cheating on my father and filled with self-righteous indignation that she had the right to do what she wanted for the way she had been treated, and that goes for everything that had ever happened to her in her life. But if she had a bad day or if she had a good day, there was a pill at the end of it. So all of it was normal to me. So one of the major addicts in my life was a woman. And then the 12 steps and the recovery textbooks were talking about men, and the poor wives of the addicts. So that didn't resonate with me either. By the time this woman came to me in my recovery when I was so spiritually bankrupt. She said, what if we did the steps around your marriage? What if we changed the language to actually match the situation that you're in? So what does that mean, right? Step one is I'm powerless over alcohol or whatever the substance is, and my life has become unmanageable, right? If you're somebody who's not an addict, that means nothing. Okay, that doesn't pertain to me. Why would I ever use that step for any reason, right? But I wasn't at that moment in danger of drinking, but I was on the brink of insanity trying to save my marriage. So we changed the language to say, I am powerless over my marriage, my husband's resentment towards everything that happened on the front end of my addiction, whether he'll ever forgive me, the future of the marriage, all of my hopes and dreams and what I thought it was going to look like at 30 years old. And when I try to exert power over him and try to change his mind and force him to love me, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. I am obsessed with everything outside of me. And until I can control it, I don't feel good inside. I have no access to peace. I have no access to power. I have no sense of worthiness. And we went through the steps just like that. And we got to the 9th step.
Together with your husband?
No, with this new woman who was in, by the way, multiple 12-step programs. So she also had a wider lens through which she could help me, which is really important. And we got to the 9th step and she said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? So you want to talk about the root of our troubles. You know, addiction ends up being a real problem in people's lives. But for a very long time, it is the solution to the problem. So then what's the actual problem? And in my case, I had seen a lot of things I shouldn't have seen. I had seen a lot of trauma, and I lived inside of a brain that always told me I was never good enough. Is there a genetic predisposition towards addiction in my lineage? Absolutely. But there is no research that says that just because you have a genetic predisposition, you're going to end up with heart disease, diabetes, addiction. Your environment and what happens there can set it off. So I had this really nasty combination of being super hard on myself, and I was hyper exposed to drugs, sex, infidelity, lies, secret keeping from the earliest age. So the idea that I was 4 years sober and no one had ever said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? That it wasn't even on my radar, that I could actually forgive myself for any of the things I had done that I was ashamed of before my using took off and during my addiction, that I could actually be a good person who made bad choices instead of a bad person who made bad choices. And the reason that was so important is because only once I did that work, and by the way, forgiveness is not linear like anything that's a matter of the heart. It's practice. It's constant. When I became a mother, I had postpartum depression. My self-laceration showed up all over again. She was just wearing a different coat. And I had to get back into therapy and do all kinds of work, right? It's a process, but it was the beginning of that process of starting to interrupt my brain circuitry when it was beating me up. Wait a second, I'm doing it again. I know how that's going to make me feel. I can go ahead and go all the way down that rabbit hole, or I can say, I think you're scared right now of something. Is there a kinder way you could say this to yourself? I had to practice interrupting my inner critic.
Because you also said that your mom, sorry to interrupt, you said that your mom discouraged you from following dreams and,
That's right.
and living your true self. Was there anybody that was encouraging you as a kid? Anybody who was saying, yeah, do that, go for that?
You know, ironically, my father, the role he played in our family was the great enabler, the great codependent. Hi. And what I mean by that, there's typically those two roles playing side by side. If
Right.
there's an addict, there's often an enabler right beside them. And so I didn't realize the extent of that role until I was well into my using and well into my sobriety. When I needed a prescription drug that was not prescribed to me, he came right into Manhattan and gave me my little pill jar. Same thing with my mother, same thing with my sister. But at the same time, he always said, you go do whatever you want to do. You want to sing and dance like a fool? You want to try and be a star? You want to go on Broadway? You want to be a professional choreographer touring the world? Do it. But his voice in my house was silenced. By the time I was a teenager, he was living in the basement. My mother hated him, and she let us know. Great father, shitty husband. Can't really trust him, but he loved you girls. So I was so confused. The person whose support I wanted and needed was my mother's.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted me to get a degree. She wanted me to have the doctor in front of my name. And look at me now. I do.
I didn't hear that. She wanted to have you what?
She wanted me to have the doctor in front of my name. She wanted me, you know, she would say, and this was just her trauma, because so much had been taken. She had so much financial instability for her entire life. She really believed that if you get a degree, nobody can take it from you.
Which
To
is
some
true,
extent, that's true,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the funny part about that is she didn't teach me a thing about finances. So by the time I did decide to play it safe and go into a doctoral program, I picked a private school. I didn't look at the loan documents I was signing or the interest rates. I just signed on the dotted line. I'm going to be a doctor. Go me. And when I tell you truly that I got out of graduate school and was in $100,000 of debt, but my salary was $60,000, I was like, Mama, you said this was a surefire way to a stable life. I think we got it wrong. I think we got this one wrong. I think I should have read between the lines, you know.
But
so
you're okay now.
I am.
You are doing everything that you set out to do. You are breaking the circuit. You are a mother of two beautiful humans, and you're back in a healthy marriage.
Yep.
And you're singing and dancing.
Yep.
And this book comes out today.
Yep.
And what's it going to do?
Yeah.
We're going to put it out into the universe.
Yes, let's put it out. So, you know, I said to you guys, this was a memoir when I started, right? And then what it became was a modern version of the 12 steps, because that's what saved my life. So the book is structured in 12 chapters. Each chapter corresponds to one of the steps. I share the stories of my life, but then I make practical applications for the reader who's going through anything. You could literally use one of those steps when you're stuck in traffic, in some road rage.
Well, there's a lot of it. So which one do we use?
You could use any of them, truly, though. But that's a great one for step one. I'm powerless over the traffic.
Yep.
And I love to be early, and now I'm going to be late. And if I try to scream at everybody to my right and left, my life is going to become unmanageable in the following ways, right?
Tell them what the things I can control and the things I can't.
Exactly.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
And that's right. The serenity prayer. That's a really good one. So that's what my book has become, a self-help memoir, a way to take the steps and have anybody, addict or not, use them as a pathway through their pain. And in the process of writing and turning away from just being Samantha the doctor, which I did for over a decade. Some of the people in this room are former clients of mine. I was their PT for 10 years. But I could always see the soul sickness in the person, the thing that was making them stuck in some emotional cycle of dysfunction that was ultimately going to get in the way of me curing their knee pain. And so finally, this book is the merger of where science meets the soul. It's everything I know as a clinician about the science of real change and everything I've learned as a sober woman that has taken me to my knees, that now I am on the other side of. And I'm on a mission to save lives, truly. That's
Amazing.
the goal. Yeah.
Well, we are so proud of you, and it's just a beautiful book, and it's real. It's in the same voice that you're hearing now, sitting here is how it's written. That's what we both did. We were like,
Yes, we did.
When you read this, I want you to hear me reading it to you.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Which I think you've absolutely accomplished. And someday maybe it might be a film.
Someday it might. Jolie and I are
we're cooking
something up.
And we, if anybody has any questions for the doctor, we are at that point.
We are at that point.
We wish we could take questions from the people out there.
I know. I wonder if there's a way to do that, but you have a question.
I hope you do well.
Thank you.
I guess you got a doctorate in what?
Physical therapy.
Physical therapy.
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
Long Island University.
Where?
Long Island University, which is actually in Brooklyn. The campus is in Brooklyn. Yeah, because as a
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Now you're taking clients.
I sure do.
Therapy or something like that.
Well, I'm not a certified psychologist, right?
Whatever you do.
But yes, if my dream client, my dream client is somebody who truly wants to get well in mind and in body and in spirit, where I could apply the steps to their life circumstance and train their body and just have them step into their power.
Are you an entertainer now, or where do you have some?
I am recording a bunch of music, and I am taking my speaking, like you heard tonight, my story on the road, where I will be sharing my story and then performing at the end. So it's sort of a reinvention of a book tour, if you will. I'm not doing it here. I'll have to tell you about my next one. I have one in Vegas coming up, actually. I sing and dance. Yeah. And it's original music.
What kind of dancing do you do?
Oh.
I think he wants to see the show.
I think I'm going to have to get your email. I'm a hip hop dancer. I may not look like it, but
she's an amazing dancer.
It's worth a watch. Let's just put it that way.
Just what you would.
They or you?
Couple of sharp steps.
Well, you do have a one that you're going to do late in June, where you're going to be performing, right?
Yeah. On June 30th, actually, in Hollywood at a fancy hotel called the Astor. I will be doing a longer version of this talk on a stage. There'll be some theatrical elements built into the speech, and then I will perform. And it's from 1 to 4 p.m. on a Sunday. We'll go up to the roof. We'll hang out. So it's coming up. So if you're local and you're watching or you're
What
here.
high school did you go to? Are you local? Did you go to local high school? Oh, you were.
No, I'm from New York.
New York.
Everything was New York. Yeah. New York.
Did you go up to the Hamptons?
That was never my thing. It was never, surprisingly, because all the trouble I was getting into, that would have been a perfect place to go.
There was plenty of trouble in the city. You didn't have to go that far.
That's right. I was in Manhattan. I didn't need to. Trouble to my left and right, much like right now. Any other questions?
Welcome to you. What about this other book? Miss Fisher?
This is my book.
What you've been promoting her?
Well, that's why I came.
Huh?
That's why I came here today to promote my book. Came out 7 years ago.
But
Yeah.
I will say,
You're reading my book.
I'm reading her book right now. This is when we met after we were like, wow, we have quite a bit in common. We need to sit down and talk. We exchanged our books. Her book is, I have many books on my nightstand, but hers is at the top. It's the one I'm almost finished with right now. And it's absolutely riveting. So if you haven't read her book, you should. I can't put it down. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How's your daughter doing?
I have 2 kids. They're amazing.
What are
Yeah.
they up to? What are they doing?
They're little. They're teeny tiny. 5 and a half Not so teeny tiny anymore.
Yeah, they're not little anymore.
Yeah, I have a 5.5-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. Jack just turned 9. Pretty wild, huh?
What do they think? Have they seen you perform?
They think their mom is a singer and an author. My son heard today, I got some amazing news about my book. It's an Amazon bestseller, which is insane because it came out today. And my son heard me say that to my husband and he just squeezed me. Oh my God, mommy. You know, obviously not understanding the implication of any of this, but he's old enough to go, this is the thing my mom cares the most about. And number one must mean something important. So I'm going to give her a hug.
That's sweet.
Yeah, my kids are just watching their mom live out loud, you know, and put herself first, which is not what I saw my mom do.
Well, how is your relationship with your parents now?
Such a good question. Oof. So my father passed away 5 years ago. And that was really hard for me because I had so much time sober and I had made several amends to him. We had a tough relationship. Once I accumulated some time sober, I was very angry at the role he played in my family. You know, I felt like you should have protected me. Why didn't you? Right? And yet when I wanted the drugs from him, he was the best dad ever. And he also always supported my dreams. So it was complicated and confusing. But when he died, I felt like I still came into every interaction with a chip on my shoulder. I couldn't quite thaw out from the anger. And so I felt so much regret.
Mm.
And I spent 2 years. So he died in 2019. Until sometime in 2021, I was trying to run from that grief. In sobriety, right? So there's physical relapse. And then there's the thing that probably everyone in this room can relate to, which is emotional relapse. When we relapse into an old behavior that we know is harmful, but it's so comfortable. And it also makes us feel like we have a false sense of control when things feel out of control. So I was not well for 2 years.
But how was it with your mother?
I'm getting there.
Because you have children.
I do.
So
I do.
would think if your mother has any kind of maternal, which it sounds like that's questionable, that she would want to see your grandkids.
Yes. So in the wake of losing my sister 2 years ago, my mother was in New York. She had been there her whole life. The place she was living in, which was an assisted living facility, because she's bipolar and she refuses to take her meds, and her living situation became very, very dire over a series of years, where eventually my sister and my father and I had to get her somewhere she could be safer. That building was being sold. So I said, why don't you come out here? It's just me and you now. And you can see your grandkids and we could have a relationship and maybe something good can come out of this big mess. And she moved out here. She lives 2 miles away. It was really good for a few months. And she had been taking her meds and she was stable for a little while. A couple years before moving to California, she had become stable for the first time in a decade. And then she stopped taking her meds. And she's unfortunately right now really, really unstable and very dysregulated. And she becomes very angry and makes really bad decisions and is scary to my children.
You can't really have
So
all
no.
your kids then.
Right now, it feels again like I'm in the presence of a ghost when I am near her. And it is devastating. And it's hard to swallow that this is part of my story after everything that's happened, but it is. And I've expressed my love for her. And whenever she writes to me, I say, I love you. But my time with her is extremely limited. And the boundaries I have had to set are extremely firm. So that's where it's at. Yeah.
I think every family kind of goes through that.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes you just don't realize that because I'm a child of the 50s, that things weren't talked about.
Mhm.
So my mother was extremely depressed
Mm.
too, and my father was in the service. So my aunt, my uncle, my grandmother lived with us, and we didn't realize when we went to live with them for a year that she was, you know, having problems. So, which actually went on throughout her whole life, but people didn't talk about them. So it's really not uncommon the things you've gone through, or I think to some extent a lot of families have them, but back in those days, it just wasn't talked about.
Yeah.
And there was really no place you could go.
Mm.
It wasn't talked about in school or in church or any place, actually. Now mental illness is out there first and foremost. We see it every day with people lying in the streets.
Yes,
and
we do.
stuff, and it's still a terrible problem that nobody seems to be able to solve. So I think it's good that you've got books that kind of tell that story.
That
And
we
then
came
you
out on
get
the
through it.
yes,
Then
Yes.
you could get through it.
Exactly.
and also yeah,
Sometimes you get through it, but you're very scarred.
Yes.
and also that puts you in a position in your healthiest state when things are going well and when you're living your best life to have to then take care of someone else is not fair and right, and especially when it's your own mother. Like I have had moments of that with my own mother, and like you were talking about when you lost your dad, I felt the same way. Like he was a terrible father. He was a philanderer and a gambler and an addict and all those things. He was so much more. But when I lost him, I realized that I had forced myself into a relationship with him as an adult. And I didn't know how deeply I would feel that. Like I felt it, like it really caught me really off guard. Like I collapsed into myself for a while with the loss of my father, even though he wasn't around when I was a kid. You never know what that's going to bring, all the stuff it's going to bring up for you in your marriage and you as a mother and you as all those things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think this stuff's been going on for centuries. And I'm so grateful that I've chosen to live instead of die and to spread the message because maybe it will help somebody else. You know, that's the goal.
We do need to work on healthcare in general because mental health care is healthcare.
That's
But
right.
in this country, I think we don't still have it right, as I've had to navigate it for one of my children as well. But it's a real problem if and it's a problem because in our own houses, we don't allow, we're like, don't talk about that because people are less, we keep up appearances, but you have to be able to go to someone. And if you need help to be able to go, like you said this, maybe it was in the script, make me the one that you come to. Like I'm ready to help now,
Yep.
Yep.
I thank you both so much for sharing. I have a lot of things similar and different. Thank you, God. I got to start working the 12 steps like 45 years ago. So
Wow.
I'm older, not that old, but I learned to move when I was very young and lived my life. Of course, it's just a continual process, but I also I'm a therapist. I'm an art therapist. But the question that I have, I just wanted to share that because we bring that with us wherever we go, right? So it's our story. So I have a lot of stories also, and I studied. I was a journalist for a while, blah blah. But I love to write, and I've been saying, I'm 71, so I've been. When I'm in my 60s, I'm going to write. I carry around all these stories and journals in physical form and in up here. So my question is, and I haven't read your book, but could you talk a little bit about the process of writing the book? And because I think that I'm always writing books, when I'm walking, I'm writing, when I'm sitting here, I'm writing. I mean, you know what I mean. So, and I do sit down, but there's always another idea and they grow and they shrink. And how did you discipline yourself? And what's the process? What was your, if you don't mind sharing?
I would love to share that. People ask me that a lot. And Where I'll start is with this quote, because this quote from a book called Atomic Habits, and it's been out forever. It's sold millions of copies. It's wonderful. Stuck with me from the second I read it, and it was critical when I was going to start writing.
Atomic habit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Habits
Habits.
with an S.
Okay.
And the quote is, we don't rise to the level of our goals, the goal being, in this
Yes.
case, writing the book.
It is the goal.
We fall to the level of our systems.
Okay.
So, yeah, I want to write a book. What system am I putting in place to achieve that goal?
Yeah.
Because life is busy and there's always tomorrow. And yet there never is
Yeah.
tomorrow, right?
Right.
So I said, what's a goal I can stick to and keep no matter what, that's non-negotiable, that's not too big? And I figured it out. And it was, I'm going to write for 30 minutes a day for 30 days. I'm going to pick a time where my children are in school, or if they're home, my husband can help, or if I have to stick them in front of the screen, no matter what, even if I sit at the computer and I have nothing to say, 30 minutes of writer's block, I'm stuck in that seat because I made a promise to myself. And when you keep the promises you make to yourself, you build up confidence.
I've done that morning pages,
Mhm.
the morning pages. But that's a free flowing thing. But I like what you're saying because it would be sticking to the idea, not just the free
Yep.
flow writing, like sticking to the idea.
And the other part of that was, there's no way I would have gotten through it if I had said, all right, start at the beginning, figure out your chapter 1. I don't know what my chapter 1 is. I know what some of the stories of my life are. So I'm going to pick a story
I love it.
and just start writing about the story.
I just want to tell one thing because I don't want to say too much, but I recently heard this, someone, who knows if it was TikTok that my daughter taught me, but they said, if you were laying on your deathbed, what's the one thing that you would say, damn, I didn't do it? And that's the one that comes up for me. And there's 1,000 things that I love and do. And there's so many things. But that's the main one, and it seems to be the main one that it's not avoidance as much as it is, I'd rather go, even like come here or go to the beach or do. But really deep inside, it's always the one that's weighing here because I have everything set up. And I've written in my life, but it's always been writing like magazine articles or things about corporations or whatever articles, working at a nonprofit. I know how to write, but my actual stories are the ones that are, I'll do that later. So I'm just saying it out loud.
Yeah. I love that.
Now you just made a commitment.
Yeah, you did.
With all of us.
Thank you.
and I think you said something really important. When my sister died, a part of me died too. But I also was really clear that I had a few different choices. I could relapse and guarantee my own death. I could coast and be at a 5 out of 10 forever, just numbing myself over different things, or fully live. And I decided to fully live, and I have had an urgency about my life that only loss can give somebody.
Yeah, I get it.
And the fact that when you think about being on your deathbed, and
I know it.
what it is that you would regret, that's your urgency.
It is.
So how do you take that urgency and keep it at the front of what you're doing every day?
I just want to say one more thing that goes with the 12 steps. This is the second one more thing. But if I was going to put it into the steps, like you said, every day, like, what is it? I would say I'm powerless over being perfect, and my life becomes so manageable, and then you go through, right?
Absolutely.
Because I want it to be, it's the one thing that I want to be perfect. Like, you come from families, I'm filled with families of writers, like da-da-da-da. And so they're all perfect in my mind, although they're not, of course, right?
Have you read Brene Brown's work?
A little bit, the stories we tell.
I would read Daring Greatly.
Okay.
Some of her work about perfectionism and vulnerability has been life-changing as a hardwire.
Daring Greatly and Atomic Habits.
That's right.
Thank you.
And breaking the circuit.
And this.
And growing up Fisher.
Of course. But
You have 4 new books on your nightstand.
But thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so happy I came. Thank you.
We are
You're
too.
welcome.
When you're going through your addictions that you wanted to get out of, did you have someone to talk to, or were you reading anything helping you? Are you reading anything now that feels pertinent to you?
Having a sponsor in the program can be really helpful. I will say I had some really bad sponsors. I mean, my first one, I loved him to death, but then he killed himself. So what was that teaching me about sponsor-sponsee relationships? Then I had a sponsor who was shoving God down my throat when I was the most anti-God ever. She couldn't meet me where I was at. But I had sober friends, which was really important. And they were my life raft until I finally found a sponsor whose words could land in my nervous system in a way that made me feel safe. So to this day, I have that kind of sponsor, not the same one. I don't check in with her that often. I feel like I go to what I now call God, which is the whisper of my intuition. I have a very select group, one of them is here, of sober women in my life that I love and trust no matter how much time has gone by. And also, I find serious value in reading spiritual literature that is not the literature of the 12-step rooms. That stuff, with the exception of a few of those books, never really did it for me. It's partly why I wrote my book. Gabrielle Bernstein is sober. She's written, actually, she just has a 10th book coming out right now. Wonderful self-help books. Brene Brown is a huge one. Glennon Doyle, if you guys know her, she's got Untamed. She has a couple of extraordinary best-selling books. Gabor Mate, who's an addiction specialist. I mean, my nightstand is always being replaced with somebody's memoir or a self-help book that just makes my life so much richer because I get to see through such a colorful lens. Wow, I never thought about it like that. Yeah.
You stay up on politics, like international stuff that's going on.
Yes-ish.
But you read the newspaper.
I don't love to stay up on politics because it's a little bit nightmarish, but I don't read the newspaper, no. Maybe online. Yeah. Yes.
How about your husband? What's your husband? You have a husband?
I do. The same guy that I had cheated on 1,000 times when I was an addict, who looked at me with shame in his eyes, who I was on the brink of a separation and divorce with. You got to read how that story plays out in the book because it's absolutely unbelievable that we are still together, but we are. We've been together 20 years now. Through hell and high water. Yeah.
I want to go back to what the young lady was asking you about.
Yeah.
Both of you have written memoirs. Both of you have had big lives. How do you narrow it down to what you want to tell, what's appropriate to tell?
I mean, I had an editor that, I mean, I wrote the book that I wanted to write for sure. My book is also in like bite-sized pieces. Like you don't have to read it front to back. But I was told bleed more on the page. And I was like, oh, can I tell these things? Can I talk about these things?
You had famous people in yours. So
Right.
that was a little trickier.
Yeah. And then there was a legal pass where there were 3 things I had to take out.
Yep.
And you know, I mean, there's a lot more to the story.
I'm sure.
But this is like really jam-packed with raw truth and humor. Must have humor.
Was it
That's what I was going to ask you because your sister was ridiculously funny in a sick way. You know, alcoholism, sleeping around, that you could always, and that was my next question. I don't want to say, are you as funny as your sister? But you got some inherent.
Oh, she's hilarious.
Read her books, and she got out where you could. You feel embarrassed about laughing, but it's a laugh out loud. I worked in the industry, so I kind of know the way the music industry is, kind of tied in with the the movie industry. So do you have that same sense of humor as her?
I mean, I think it's a Fisher girl thing. I think if I have a fraction of what she had, she had the most beautiful, insane brain I've ever, and there will never be another one of her, but I think it's funny. Do you think it's funny?
Oh yeah.
It's clever. I have we have that. I have another sister, Trisha Lee, who also is a talented writer and singer and actress, and we all have a little bit of a bite to us because of either that or what happens, when you grow up with iconic parents and then you follow in the same industry. It's
kind of hard to be normal, I think.
Yeah, what is normal?
I guess you can define how normal is, but I just find when you're around a lot of Hollywood stuff, for me, the music, I wasn't into drugs. I did like alcohol for a long time, but everything was okay because I had children at a young age and they were the most important thing. But I think there's certain industries that just are not conducive to good marriages and a really good life. I mean, we all have these ideas, like I thought, modeling would be so great. Well, it wasn't. It was just a lot of hard work. It wasn't great.
You have to find the other things that fill you up, that fill up your cup, like that. I learned that a long time ago from my mom, who would go, God damn it, Jane Fonda got that. She had it that we have that insecurity. It's like ambition and narcissism and insecurity. It's a terrible cocktail. But there's
your mother basically paid off all of Harry Carl's debts.
My mother is Connie Stevens, not Debbie Reynolds.
No,
yeah.
I'm thinking Debbie Reynolds. Yeah.
Same thing.
Talk about the most unbelievable work ethics and putting on a face like everything was fine.
Yes. Like you said, from another era.
Yes,
Yes. I mean, I was born out of wedlock. Nobody talked about it. It was taboo in the late 60s. It was nobody. They loved my mom. The press loved my mom. So they protected her from,
And I actually protected your father a lot too.
Yeah.
I did work in that business. So nobody talked about what was going on. So
we talk about it now.
Sure do.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's a sensitive thing still. When you can say maybe, well, my father was a drug addict, but I loved him. Well, we all tend to love our parents, or at least want to love our parents, even if they're not lovable. So, but I think it's still a hard subject to talk about. Maybe you turned out good, but so many people that grow up with parents that are in the business, and it takes a lot of their time away from their kids. So it's extremely hard.
Yeah. Yep. I have 5 kids and I'm in this business, so I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
Hopefully none of them write a book about me.
Well, if they do, let's hope it's funny.
Perfect.
Can you answer?
Yeah.
Yes,
about
you go.
what you left out or
So
decided to put in?
I have 2 ways to answer your question. The first is knowing what I was really trying to do, which is help as many people as possible.
But you started off as a memoir
Mm-hmm.
and it shifted.
Yes. So along the whole way, I had to keep asking myself, if this is going to be in the book, if it's staying, is it helping someone?
Okay.
Or am I just doing it for drama or for whatever, right? I had to really get clear on my intention, and I had to make sure that what I was writing was coming from a healed place and not a wounded place.
Mm-hmm.
Very different. And I'm not saying that I'm healed from these losses. I mean, I started writing right after my sister died. But where it's at now and what I did with it, the story of my marriage, my husband was terrified because I could have cast him in a really bad light. And I didn't, because it wasn't about what he did to me or didn't do to me. It was about my journey through the forgiveness process, both to myself and to him. And that's going to help somebody else. So that's how I made those decisions. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
daughter was at tennis. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you're
wanted to come
here.
here for tonight. So I am 15 pages into your book. I got it this afternoon. I was like, oh, I need to read something before I come in here. And so I actually didn't know that you had a book as well. So I knew you were here, but I didn't know it was for the book. So I'm excited to pick that one up as well. While I was reading the first 15 pages,
Yes.
I was thinking to myself, because you and I, first of all, I just started listening to Atomic Habits. And as I was
Yes.
listening to it earlier this past weekend, I was like, this is what Sam tells me to do. Just need to sit down every day, just like him. Okay. It's so funny that it was brought up. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, as I was reading the beginning stages about writing about your parents and their relationship, and this would probably go for you as well. If your father was alive and if your mother wasn't on one of her crazy experiences right now, and if your parents were alive, I don't know if they're both alive.
My mom's alive. My father's not.
How do you work through what you write and don't write? Because when I think about writing my life down, it would be very difficult for me to not include my childhood, yet I couldn't fathom hurting my parents in that way when they've done so much for me in my adulthood. So I'm curious how you guys work through that.
Well, I think that's such a good question. And it's a real consideration, right? But it's also the kind of thing that will stop someone from ever writing their book. So the first thing I want to say to that is get it all out of you. Everything. The grossest stuff. Because by the time your book gets to print, you will have changed your mind. You will have become so clear on what you should and should not put in. You will have run it through probably multiple editors. Even if you self-publish, you'll probably get some help from some experts who will make it really clear this does not move the needle of your story forward. This might cause more heartbreak than hope. Take it out. You don't have to know that or worry about that now. It will become clear, is what I would say. So don't not start.
Before you came in, I said, somebody told me you have to write as though everybody's dead in the story. So then you don't leave it out because they're not here to say that never happened. Or if you do end up reading my book, you'll see that I pull no punches. And we were, again, another Hollywood moment, Vegas moment. We were on our way to Jerry Lewis's funeral, which was very well attended by lots of people that you would recognize. And my mom, it was after her stroke, so I was pushing her in a wheelchair, and it was like, how is this going to be like through the casinos? And like, that's where I grew up. Like we spent 30 weeks out of the year in Vegas hotels. And so we get on the plane, and I said, I want to read the chapters that are about you, because I had her captive there. And she stared at me and like with tears in her eyes, and she said, you're an incredible writer. She didn't say, don't say that. I did have one of her friends, a comedian that used to open up for her for years, write me an email saying, how could I do to my mother what I did in the book? And I didn't respond to him. He doesn't live in LA and he's very, very old. And I just didn't feel like engaging, but I wondered which parts he thought were me doing something to her. Like it was the truth. I told the truth about how we grew up and what happened. And it's not all terrible shit. Like, but I think what you're saying is just like, get it out.
And I also think I've reached a point in my life personally where the saying the truth, not without care and consciousness, but saying the truth is the most important thing above anybody else and how they might feel. Truly, like that is the business I'm in now. I am in the business of truth telling. So when my mother is alive, and I wrote some really hard things about her, That is not, she bought the book. She's probably reading it right now. She came to my book signing on Saturday out of her mind. She was reading it when I walked into Barnes and Noble, and I was like, oh shit. You know, truly, I was like, here we go. But I would never do it differently, ever.
I think that what you're saying to Jolly, that somebody made that comment. I think it's just like television, a book. You have the choice of going online and kind of reading what it's about, and then you have the choice of reading that or not reading that. So rather than to make rude comments or tell you shouldn't have said that, you have the choice not to read it or to read it. He kind of, you can get a synopsis. So I think you have to kind of be true to yourself.
Yep.
I would never want to write a book about my mother because nobody would ever believe it.
Now you should.
Exactly.
So, you just, and I actually babysit for a woman who's writing, and she was so upset the other day when I was over there because she said, oh, somebody back east had made these terrible comments about it. And I said, that's part of being a writer, like an actor. There's going to be people that like your work and people that don't like your work. So you have that option. There's 90% of the stuff on television I don't care for, so I don't watch it. It's just got to be that way. And I think you're right. You have to tell what you feel you have to tell.
It's cathartic too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's very cathartic.
One thing that comes to my mind when you're talking is like this cliche, like say what you mean, but don't say it meanly. And it's like, I think, I have written a lot. It's not in the book, but I've written a lot. And I think it's, if we're, like you talked about, if we're healing, active verb, healing, but then when we tell these stories, they don't have to be attacks. And they're just like I'm also like, please help me because I want to be telling the truth, like my truth, my authentic truth. So it's not like a criticism. It's like, this is what I lived, whatever the situation is. And I think that's what I hear you saying. And I do come to these talks a lot. And I think a lot of people talk about exactly that. Like there's a writer named Dani Shapiro. She's written a lot of things. And she has written a lot about her family. She wrote the book Inheritance about being adopted, not adopted, but it's a long story. But it's a very good book. But, she just tells it kind of like how it's her experience and how it is. And I think there's a lot of things that at some point she talked about being like, wondering if she should say it or not, and finding ways with her editor, but just not to be mean about it. Because like we could have our anger, but then those are the things like that we get to work through. We get to work through our anger so that when we work on these chapters or whatever, the writing, then we can tell the story, but we don't have to be trying to get back at them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you know what I'm hearing you say? Your authentic, intuitive voice knows exactly what to do.
Right.
And knows that that's the place you want to come from when you write.
Yes.
And then you have a perfect voice who's chiming in.
Right. It's who we are. But I think I know exactly what you're talking about because I have like family, like step this and half that and everything. And, there was a lot of things that shaped the way that I grew up. And some of those things are like, I don't know if they fit, but I like also so much what you said that get through all those editors, it's like, does this really is this really like the goal that you talked about, like the intention? Like, wait, this was like one of those tangents.
Do you have siblings? Did you say you have siblings?
Oh, I have a half and a step and a reel and a.
Because I was thinking about the same thing with you and your sister and me mostly with my little sister, because Carrie was much older than us, but my little sister and I are 14 months apart and we grew up in the same house. So we shared the experience, but our perception of what was going on in the house is very, very different. So how I saw my mom interacting with us was similar to what Trisha saw, but she handled it differently too. She doesn't have any of the, predisposition for addiction or anything. She's like, not at all.
Wow.
I have a question. You're growing up in New York, and I'm wondering, why, you're probably around friends that influence you to take some drugs, marijuana usually, and
Oh, I was doing way harder stuff than that,
well, in the
but
beginning,
go on.
It's the gateway drug. Come on, Sam.
Boring. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so, what motivated you to start getting into pills, and what kind of pills were you taking, and what did you get out of it? Why?
Well,
Because I grew up, before all this stuff, before marijuana and all that stuff, and
Oh, it was around. When did you? You're not that old.
Uh,
Had alcohol.
Yeah.
I know I'm not as old as I know I'm not that old, but it wasn't around.
It wasn't around where you
I
were.
was in Beverly Hills, and nothing was happening there. It's just everybody's clean living.
Oh, sure.
never underestimate the power of denial. I highly doubt that, but
No,
that's
I
your
didn't see it. I
story.
didn't see it.
Yeah, you didn't see it.
I don't think it was happening. But I saw marijuana start to take off, and then pills coming in. LSD. And did you take LSD?
Nope. Never really cared for hallucinogenics.
So what kind of pills were you taking?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, not only was my mother abusing pills, and so it was totally normal, but my sister, who was 2.5 years older than me, was sneaking out of the house and going to the nightclubs in New York City and taking ecstasy and staying out till the sun went up. So that was totally normal. And then it was all over the place. I mean, I grew up in a major city. I was allowed to go into Manhattan as a teenager and use a fake ID and get into the nightclubs where everybody was dropping ecstasy. So it was readily available everywhere. And in the place where I was learning everything I was supposed to learn about the world, it was normalized. So I was off to the races, I mean, what more would I need besides the exposure in my own home and then the exposure out in the world?
So you did what everybody else was doing.
Yeah, for a while. And then I did a lot of cocaine, which not everybody else was doing, until it almost killed me.
I have to leave now because I'm walking home and I don't want to walk in the dark. I got both of your books. And
Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank you.
It was very enjoyable.
Thank you so much.
We have time for one more question if anyone else has any.
Awesome.
Me? Oh.
I guess I can ask.
Yeah.
Just knowing you're an artist, a writer, dancer, singer, is there one creative outlet you prefer over the other? Or do you get different things out of each one?
That's such a great question. My first love was dance. So if I had to pick an answer to that, I think that will always be the first. And all these other creative endeavors, like writing and singing and screenplays, are a very close second. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And the crowd goes wild.